So I have a lot of questions about the vaccines and specifically the COVID vaccines. But can we first focus on what I guess you kind of came to the forefront of society's attention for, which was the Great Barrington Declaration first. So if I can try and summarize in layman's way, and then perhaps you can either completely disagree with my summary or you can expand on it. The Great Barrington Declaration it was co-authored between you and two other epidemiologists from Harvard and Stanford, I believe. You outlined the idea that focused protection ought to be the societal reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic response. And that would mean that we allow the vast majority of people who aren't particularly at risk. Once we kind of stratify for risk, we see that it seems to be the immunocompromised and the elderly who are most at risk. We allow those people back into society or to just fully function in society. And then we offer focused protection in a bunch of different ways towards people who are more at risk from COVID-19, which would, if I'm saying this correctly, would produce some level of herd immunity, some level of a landscape of immunity that the virus would struggle to be too deadly in once we allow the more vulnerable people back into society, perhaps once they've been vaccinated. Is that about correct?
Yeah, yeah, indeed
Phew.
it is.
Okay, cool.
So that's absolutely that says it in a nutshell. But I think where we were coming from on this was really to consider what was the right approach at that point when the epidemic, the pandemic was in various stages of progression in different parts of the world. So in May of 2020, I put forward the idea that the first big epidemic wave had already occurred in the UK, and I will stand by that now, given what we've observed. But that unfortunately got misinterpreted by many as me saying the pandemic was over, which is a bit odd, given that if I thought so, why would I be, sticking my neck out to help put together the Great Barrington Declaration in October that year if I didn't think there was still a problem ahead of us. So you get this big first wave, and then you get subsequent smaller waves. And in those smaller waves, fewer people are vulnerable because many of those smaller waves are composed of reinfections, which means that people have already been exposed. But you will still have vulnerable people, certainly in the second wave, and then in the third wave, fewer. And so now we're seeing this Omicron wave, which I think the Omicron is sort of incidental. I think the fact is that most people now have already either had it or been vaccinated, and therefore this virus arrives in a landscape of people who have already had exposure to the virus, or at least the spike protein, and that's what's protecting us. So, but given that we had still ahead of us a rocky journey, what we felt we needed to try very hard to get people to think about was whether lockdowns and the other non-pharmaceutical interventions were the appropriate response, because I see it as three types of things, three things that we didn't have, three unknowns. One was, what exactly was the virus going to do? And I think that was overplayed, the uncertainty on that, because it was a coronavirus. We knew that it was very likely that we would do what it's doing now, actually, that you would see these smaller and smaller waves, that you would see fewer and fewer deaths, and that you would get this buildup of herd immunity, which is, I think, what is playing a very major role now in the profiles that we're seeing. But nonetheless, at that point, we didn't know. So I'd accept that there was some uncertainty in that. We didn't know to what extent these non-pharmaceutical interventions were actually going to stop the spread, have any effect on spread. We didn't know that. And that was what I found very difficult at that point, and still do, is that a lot of scientists, a lot of card-carrying epidemiologists were saying with great conviction that this was going to work. And actually, we didn't know that. And now we do know that they don't work very well. I mean, they must have some effect. The third thing, about which I think we did have certainty, was that these measures were going to cause enormous harm to young people and to the poor. And that was the main point. That was where we were coming from. That was our base.